Good morning. Today I will be reading on chapter 6 from the book called Apollyon, and it is I believe, the fifth book in the Left Behind series. And I will begin to read now. I'm worried about you, Buck said. I'll be all right, Chloe said. I'm glad I came, and I'm doing better than I thought I would. I knew it was a little early for me to take such a trip, but it's worked out. That's not what I'm worried about. She pulled away from him and rolled onto her side to look at him. What then? There was a knock at the door. Excuse me, Tyson said, but did you want to watch the Carpathia response on television? Chloe started to get up, but Buck stopped her. Thanks, Tyson. Maybe in a little while. If we miss it, you can recap it for us in the morning. Very well. Good night, loved ones. Buck Williams, Chloe said. I don't know when I've felt so special. You've never missed a breaking news story in your life. Don't make me out to be altruistic, hon. Altruistic, hon. I have no magazine to write for anymore, remember? Oh, you do too. You have your own. Yeah, but I'm the boss and I sign the checks. There's no money for any checks, so what am I going to do? Fire myself? Anyway, you chose me over the latest news. Buck rolled toward her and kissed her again. I know what he's going to say anyway. He'll have Fortunato on first to sing his praises. Then he'll act all humble and self-conscious and attack Tyson for embarrassing him after all he's done for the rabbi. Chloe nodded. So what's on your mind? The baby. She raised her brows at him. You too? He nodded. What are you thinking? That we weren't too smart, she said. Our baby will never reach 5, and we'll be raising him or her while we're trying to just stay alive. Worse than that, he said. If we were trying just to survive, we might hole up somewhere safe. The baby might be relatively secure for a while. But we've already declared ourselves. We're enemies of the world order, and we're not going to just sit by and protest in our minds. I'll have to be careful, of course, she said. Yeah, he said, snorting, like you have been so far. She lay there silently. Finally, she said, maybe I'll have to be more careful, huh? Maybe. I just wonder if we're doing right by the little one. It's not like we can change our minds now anyway, Buck. So what's the point? I'm just worried, and there's nobody else I can tell. I wouldn't want you telling anyone else. So tell me not to worry, or tell me you're worrying with me or something. Otherwise, I'm going to get all parental on you and start treating you like you don't have a brain. You've been pretty good about not doing that, Buck. I've noticed. Yeah, but sometimes I ought to do more of it. Somebody's got to look out for you. I like when you keep track of me a little. I don't feel demeaned by it. I need and appreciate it. To a point, she said. Granted. And I'm also quite good at it. And subtle, he said, draping his arm over her. Buck, she said, we really should watch Carpathia, don't you think? He shrugged, then nodded. If we're going to have any chance of thwarting anything, he does. They padded out to where Tyson and James sat watching TV. No word on Jacob yet? Buck asked. James shook his head. And I'm none too pleased. I merely asked him to go in and get them, Buck said. Playing decoy and drawing the gunfire was his idea. I wasn't happy about it either. The what? James demanded. Rayford was strangely buoyed despite Hattie's threats against Carpathia. In his mind, that showed a level of sanity that, according to Dr. Charles, she had not had in weeks. He didn't consider himself a lunatic, despite his own admittedly unrealistic wishes to be God's hitman. What he longed for, down deep, was that Hattie get healthy enough to change her mind about God. She knew the truth. That wasn't the issue. She was a person who could know the truth without acting on it. That was what Bruce Barnes had told Rayford was his own reason for having been left behind. As for Rayford, he had missed the point, despite his first wife's effort to explain it, that nothing he did for himself could earn God's favor. As for Bruce, he knew all that. He knew salvation was by grace through faith. He simply never made the transaction, thinking he could slide by until later. Later came sooner, and he was left without his family. Ken appeared at the top of the basement stairs. Doc and me was wondering if you wanted to watch down here, he said. He thinks maybe Hattie'll rest better that way. Sure, Rayford said, rising quickly. He tried dialing Chloe and Buck one more time without success and left the phone on his chair. As he left the room, Hattie called out to him. Would you leave that on, Rayford? Don't you want to sleep? Just leave it on low. It won't bother me. My people are calling around looking for Jacob, Chaim whispered as Leon Fortunato's benign smile graced the screen. If anything happened to him, I don't know. I believe no harm can come to him, Chaim. He has become a believer in the Messiah and even has the mark of the sealed tribulation saint on his forehead, visible to other believers. You're saying you can see it and I cannot? That's what I'm saying. Poppycock, how arrogant. Can you see our marks? Chloe asked. Pish posh, you have no marks, James said. We see each other's, Tyson said. I see Buck's and Chloe's plain as day. Chaim waved them off as if they were putting him on, and Fortunato was introduced. I'd better try to call Daddy before Carpathia comes on, Chloe said. She hurried to the bedroom and came back with her phone. She showed it to Buck. The readout showed Rayford had called since they were in the bedroom. She dialed his number. Rayford thought he heard his phone ring upstairs, but decided he was mistaken when it did not ring again. Looking around the basement, he wondered how a big, lanky man like Ken Ritz could live in a tiny, dark, dank spot like this. Ritz was slowly expanding it in his spare time, pointing toward the day when the entire tribulation force might have to live down there. Rayford didn't want to even think about that. Was it Rayford's imagination, or was Fortunato looking more dapper? He had not noticed while watching him at the stadium, but that was on a jerry-built setup from his laptop that wasn't as clear as the live satellite transmission directly to Ken's TV. Television usually didn't flatter a stocky middle-aged man, but Fortunato appeared trimmer, more bright-eyed, healthier, and better dressed than usual. Ladies and gentlemen of the global community, he began, looking directly into the camera as if the lens was his audience's eyes, as Carpathia had long modeled. Even the best of families has its squabbles. Since His Excellency Potent Carpathia was reluctantly swept to power more than 2 years ago, he has made tremendous strides in making the entire Earth one village. Through global disarmament, vast policy changes in the former United Nations, and now the global community, he has made our world a better place to live. After the devastating vanishings, he brought about peace and harmony. The only blips on the screen of progress were the results of things outside his control. War resulted in plagues and death, but His Excellency quickly broke the back of the resistance. Atmospheric disasters have befallen us, from earthquakes to floods and tidal waves and even meteor showers. This was all due, we believe, to energy surpluses from whatever caused the vanishings. There remain pockets of resistance to progress and change, and one of the most significant movements in that direction revealed its true nature earlier this evening before the eyes of the world. His Excellency has the power and the obvious right to retaliate with extreme measures to this affront to his authority and the dignity of his office. In the spirit of the new society he has built, however, His Excellency has an alternative response he wishes to share with you this evening. Before he does that, however, I would like to share a personal story. This is not secondhand or hearsay, not a legend or an allegory. This happened to me personally, and I assert the veracity of every detail. I share it because it bears on the very issue the potent will address, spiritually and supernaturally. Fortunato told the world the story of his resurrection at the command of Carpathia, a story Rayford had heard too many times. Fortunato concluded, and now without further ado, your potent, and to me, may I say, my deity, His Excellency Nikolai Carpathia. Chloe had been talking quietly on the phone during Fortunato's bouquet to Carpathia, While Leon uncharacteristically stumbled while both making way for Carpathia and bowing deeply to him, Chloe hung up. Hattie lost her baby, she said sadly. You reached your dad? Hattie answered. She sounded fairly lucid, all things considered. Chloe suddenly laughed, making Buck jerk to see the TV. Fortunato tried to back out of Carpathia's presence while bowing and tripping over a light cord. Out of camera range, he had apparently tumbled and rolled heavily, distracting even the unusually unflappable Carpathia and causing him to temporarily lose contact with the lens. Carpathia quickly recovered and grinned magnificently. Fellow citizens, he began, I am certain that if you did not see what happened earlier this evening at Teddy Kollek Stadium in Jerusalem, you have by now heard about it. Let me briefly tell you my view of what occurred and outline my decision of what to do about it. Let me go back to when I first reluctantly accepted my role as Secretary General of the United Nations. This was not a position I sought. My goal has always been to merely serve in whatever role I find myself. As a member of the lower parliament in my home country of Romania, I served many years for my constituents, championing their view and mine for peace and disarmament. My rise to the presidency of my motherland was as shocking to me as it was to the watching world, only slightly less than my elevation to Secretary General, which has resulted in the world government we enjoy today. One of the hallmarks of my administration is tolerance. We can only truly be a global community by accepting diversity and making it law of the land. It has been the clear wish of most of us that we break down walls and bring people together. Thus, there is now one economy highlighted by one currency, no need for passports, one government, eventually one language, one system of measurement, and one religion. That religion carries the beautiful mystery of being able to force itself from what in centuries past seemed contradictory belief systems. Religions that saw themselves as the only way to spiritually now accept and tolerate other religions that see themselves the same way. It is an enigma that has proven to somehow work, as each belief system can be true for its adherents. Your way may be the only way for you, and my way the only way for me. Under the unity of the aptly named Enigma Babylon One World Faith, all the religions of the world have proved themselves able to live harmoniously. All, that is, save one. You know the one. It is the sect that claims roots in historic Christianity. It holds that the vanishings of 2.5 years ago were God's doing. Indeed, they say Jesus blew a trumpet and took all his favorite people to heaven, leaving the rest of us lost sinners to suffer here on earth. I do not believe that accurately reflects the truth of the Christianity as it was taught for centuries. My exposure to that wonderful peace-loving religion told of a God of love and of a man who was a teacher of morals. His example was to be followed in order for a person to one day reach eternal heaven by continually improving oneself. Following the disappearances that caused such great chaos in our world, some looked to obscure and clearly figuratively passages from the Christian Bible and concocted a scenario that included this spiriting away of the true church. Many Christians leaders, now members of Enigma Babylon, say that was never taught, but the disappearances, as if it was, few serious scholars accepted it. Many others who held other views of how God might end life on earth for his followers disappeared themselves. From a small band of fundamentalists who believed they were somehow stranded here because they were not good enough to go the first time, has sprung up a cult of some substance, made up mostly of former Jews who now have decided that Jesus is the Messiah they have been looking for all their lives. They follow a converted rabbi named Tyson Ben Judah. Dr. Ben Judah, you may recall, was once a respected scholar who so blasphemed his own religion on an international television broadcast that he had to flee his home country. I come to you tonight from the very studio where Dr. Ben Judah desecrated his own heritage. While in exile, he has managed to brainwash thousands of like minded, so desperate for something to belong to that they have become his marionette church. Using a feel good psychological approach to morality, Dr. Ben Judah has used the internet for his own gain, no doubt fleecing his flock for millions. In the process, he has invented an us against them war in which you, my brothers and sisters, are them. The us in this charade call themselves true believers, saints, sealed ones, you name it. For months, I have ignored these harmless holdouts to world harmony, these rebels to the cause of a unified faith. While advisors urged me to force their hand, I believed tolerance was in order. Though Dr. Ben Judah continually challenged all we stand for and hold dear, I maintained a policy of live and let live. When he invited tens of thousands of his converts to meet in a very city that had exiled him, I decided to rise above personal affronts and allow it. In a spirit of acceptance and diplomacy, I even publicly assured Dr. Ben Judah's safety, though I was well aware that the global community and I, as its head, were the avowed enemies of this cult. I believed the only right and proper thing to do was to encourage its mass meeting. I confess it was my hope that in so doing, these zealots would see that there was value in compromise and tolerance, and that they would one day choose to align themselves with Enigma Babylon. But it would have had to have been their choice. I would not have forced their hand. And how was my magnanimity rewarded? Was I invited to the festivities, asked to welcome the delegates, allowed to bring a greeting or take part in any of the pageantry? No. Through private diplomatic channels, I was able to secure the promise that Dr. Ben Judah would not restrict my presence or prohibit my attendance. I traveled to Israel at my own expense, not even burdening global community finances, and dropped in to say a few words at what has been called the meeting of the witnesses. My supreme commander was met with the rudeness of utter silence, though he comported himself with elan regardless. The most revered supreme pontiff Peter II, the Pope of Popes, as it were, was received in no less a quietly hostile manner. Despite being a fellow clergyman, no doubt you agree this had to have been a well planned and executed mass response. When I myself addressed the crowd, though they were still obeying their mind controlling leader and not responding, I sensed they wanted to. I had the clear feeling, and a public speaker develops antenna for these things, that the crowd was with me, was sympathetic, was embarrassed by their leader, and wanted to welcome me as warmly as I was welcoming them. Though Dr. Ben Judah was ostensibly ignoring me from just a few feet away, he somehow signaled someone to release some sort of agent in the air, an invisible dust or powder that instantly parched my throat and resulted in a powerful thirst. I should have been suspicious when I immediately presented with a bottle from someone in the crowd. But as a trusting person, used to being treated as I treat others, I naturally assumed an unknown friend had come to my aid. What a disappointment to have been callously ambushed by a bottle of poisonous blood. It was such an obvious public assassination attempt that I called Dr. Ben Judah on it right there. As a pacifist not skilled in warfare, I had played right into his hands. He had hidden in the crowd the two elderly lunatics from the Wailing Wall, who have so offended the Jews in the Holy Land and have actually murdered several people who have attempted to engage them in debate. With hidden microphones turned louder than the one I was using, they shouted me down with threats and turned my humble act of diplomacy into a fiasco. I was whisked away for medical attention, only to find that I had swallowed what they gave me. I would have died instantly. If I had swallowed what they gave me, I would have died instantly. Needless to say, this is an act of high treason, punishable by death. Now, let me say this. My wish is that we still come together in spirit of peace and harmony. Let it be said that these words from the scriptures came first in this context from me. Come now and let us reason together. There is no doubt in my mind that the whole of this ugly incident was engineered and carried out by Dr. Ben Judah. But as a man of my word and lacking any physical evidence that would tie him to the assassination attempt, I plan to allow the meetings to continue for the next 2 nights. I will maintain my pledge of security and protection. Dr. Ben Judah, however, shall be exiled again from Israel within 24 hours of the end of the meeting, the night after tomorrow. Israeli authorities are insisting on this, and I would urge Dr. Ben Judah to comply, if for no other reason than his own safety. As for the two who call themselves Eli and Moshe, let this serve as public notification to them as well. For the next 48 hours, they shall be restricted to the area near the Wailing Wall, where they have posted themselves for so long. They are not to leave that area for any purpose at any time. When the meetings in the stadium have concluded, Eli and Moshe must leave the Temple Mount area. If they are seen anywhere outside their area of quarantine in the next 48 hours or in the Temple Mount area after that time, I have ordered that they be shot on sight. Some eyewitnesses have testified that the murders they have committed might somehow be convoluted into some sort of self-defense. I reject this and am exercising my authority as potent to deny them trial. Let me be clear, their appearance anywhere but near the Wailing Wall for 48 hours, or their showing their faces in public anywhere in the world after that, shall be considered reason to kill. Any global community officer or private citizen is authorized to shoot to kill. I know you will agree that this is most generous response to an ugly attack, and that allowing the meeting to continue proves a spirit of accommodation. Thank you, my friends, and good night from Israel. Rayford looked up at Ken Ritz, rocked back, and slapped his thighs. I don't know about you boys, Ritz said, but I got me some tinkering to do. For one thing, I got to find out how we can get us some of those millions and the rabbi's been fleecing off the flock. With none of us having any income anymore, we're going to need some cash. You got a minute, Ray? Floyd said, rising. Sure, Doc. They climbed the stairs, and Floyd bent over the sleeping Hattie for a moment. Seems fine for now, he said, but can you imagine postpartum blues on top of what she's already going through? You get that even with a miscarriage? It makes more sense with a miscarriage if you think about it. Rayford turned off the TV and followed Floyd to the porch. They both carefully surveyed the horizon and listened before talking. Rayford had grown used to that since he'd arrived. At Global Community Headquarters, it was a matter of knowing whom you could talk to. Out here, knowing you were not being spied on was paramount. I've got a problem, Rayford, but I hardly know you. Friendships, acquaintance, everything that has to necessarily be telescoped these days, Rayford said. You and I live together the rest of our natural lives, and it would be less than 5 years. If you've got something on your chest, you might as well shoot. You want to criticize me? Fire away. I can take it. My priorities are different than they used to be, needless to say. Oh, no, it's nothing like that. In fact, I figure you've got cause to scold me a bit after today. For snapping at me in the heat of battle? Hey, I've done my share of that. In medical emergency situations, you're in charge. You bark at whomever you have to bark at. Yeah, but even though I know Tyson is sort of a pastor, you're the chief. I need you to know that I know that and respect it. There's no time for hierarchy anymore, Doc. Now, what's on your mind? I've got a Hattie problem. Well, we all do, Floyd. She was an attractive, bright girl once. Maybe more attractive than bright, but you're seeing the worst of her just now, and I think she's coming around. You might appreciate her more in a few weeks. Just so you know, I got the drift that she and you used to work together, and that while you never actually had an affair, yeah, okay, not proud of it, but I acknowledge it. Anyway, this isn't about her being in a bed. being in a bad way and being so difficult. I'm moved by how you all seem to care so much for her and want her to become a believer. Rayford sighed. This business of her believing but not wanting to accept has me buffaloed. She's even halfway logical about it. She's not one who has to be convinced she's unworthy, is she? She's so convinced she refuses to accept what she knows is free. So what's your problem, Doc? You think she's a lost cause spiritually? Floyd shook his head. I wish it was that easy. My problem makes zero sense. You said yourself there's nothing attractive about this girl. It's obvious that when she was healthy, she was a knockout. But the poison has done its work, and the illness has taken its toll. She makes no sense when she talks, and spiritually, she's bankrupt. So you want to throw her out, and that makes you feel guilty? Floyd stood and turned his back to Rayford. No, sir. What I want is to love her. I do love her. I want to hold her and kiss her and tell her. His voice grew quivery. I care so much for her that I've convinced myself I can love her back to health in every way, physically and spiritually. He turned and faced Rayford. Didn't expect that one, did you? As Buck and Chloe lay in bed, Buck said, Will you be able to sleep if I go out for a while? She sat up. Out? It's hardly safe. Carpathia is too focused on Eli and Moshi to worry about us right now. I want to see if I can find Jacob, and I want to see what the witnesses will do in response to Nikolai's threats. You know what they'll do, she said, lying back down. They'll do what they want until the due time, and woe to the one who tries to make points with the potent by trying to kill them before that. Just the same, I'd like do me this favor, Buck. Promise you won't leave this place until I'm sound asleep. Then I'll worry only when I have to. If you're not here when I wake up this morning. Buck dressed and went looking to see if Tyson was still up. He wasn't, but Rosenzweig was on the phone. Leon, I insist on talking with Nikolai. Yes, I know all about your cursed titles. And I remind you that I knew Nikolai as a friend before he was His Excellency and the potent of this and that. But now, please put him on phone. Well, then you tell me what has happened to my driver. Rosenzweig noticed Buck, motioned for him to sit, and hit the speaker button on the phone. Leon was in mid-threat. Our intelligence sources tell us your man turned. Turned what? He's not Jewish anymore. Not Israeli? Doesn't work for me? What are you talking about? He's been with me for years. If you know where he is, tell me and I will come get him. Dr. Rosenzweig, all due respect, sir, I'm telling you your man is one of them. We wanted GC guards to personally escort Rabbi Ben Judah back to Jacob's vehicle, but he came running from the stadium firing off a high-powered weapon. Who can say how many guards and innocent civilians were killed? I can. None. It would have been all over with the news. I heard the same story. Your people were coming after Ben Judah to exact revenge for the embarrassment to Nikolai and might have done who knows what to him if he had not slipped away on his own. He wasn't on his own. He was with Buck Williams' wife, who has proven to be an American subversive who escaped from one of our facilities in Minnesota, where she had been detained for questioning. Rosenzweig glanced at Buck, who sat shaking his head slowly as if wondering where they dreamed up this stuff. Fortunato continued. She was suspected of looting after the earthquake. Leon, is Jacob alive? There was a pause. Rosenzweig grew irate. I swear, Leon, if something has happened to that young man. Nothing has happened to him, doctor. I'm trying to train you to address me properly. Oh, for the sake of heaven, Leon, are there not more important things to worry about right now, like people's lives? Supreme Commander, Dr. Rosenzweig. Supreme Nincompoop, Rosenzweig shouted. I am going out to search for my Jacob, and if you have any information that would help me, you better give it to me now. I don't need to be spoken to that way by you, sir. And Leon hung up. Rayford pulled an arm on Floyd's shoulder. put an arm on Floyd's shoulder as they went back into the house. I'm no love counselor, he said, but you're right when you say this one makes no sense. She's not a believer. You're old enough to know the difference between pity and love and between medical compassion and love. You hardly know her, and what you know is not that pretty. It doesn't take a scientist to see that this is something other than what you think it is. You lonely? Lose a wife in the rapture? Uh huh. Better tell me about her. And that is the end of chapter 6. Next, we will be reading chapter 7. Thank you for joining me and have a wonderful day.